5 Commando. In 1964, a former British Army officer with a pencil mustache and a taste for adventure flew into a country in flames. His name was Mike Hoare, though history would remember him better as Mad Mike. He'd come to the Congo to raise a private army of killers for hire. His mission? To stop a revolution. And his tools were a few newspaper ads and a terrifying level of audacity. The Congo, newly free from Belgian colonial rule, had collapsed into chaos. Prime Minister Moise Tshombe, desperate to hold the country together, reached for a last resort: mercenaries. He tapped Hoare to build a unit from scratch, an elite force drawn from the white settler societies of Southern Africa. Hoare got to work. He posted calls in South African and Rhodesian newspapers asking for physically fit white men who enjoy war. Hundreds answered. Ex-paratroopers, rogue veterans, and misfits filtered in, some for the money, some for the fight, some for the sheer hell of it. But this wasn't a drunken mob. Hoare, a stickler for discipline, enforced a rigid code: clean-shaven faces, polished boots, church on Sundays. He might have been commanding a colonial regiment in the 19th century, if not for the modern firepower and the lawless frontier they operated in. Their enemy was the Simba Rebellion, a brutal millenarian insurgency that had seized half the country. The Simbas believed in magic, war amulets, and sometimes attacked in trance-like states. They overran cities and massacred civilians. The world watched in horror. Then, 5 Commando hit back. With Hoare at the helm, the mercenaries launched a scorched earth counter-offensive. They recaptured towns one by one, freed hundreds of hostages, and sent the Simbas reeling. By late 1965, their job was done. The rebellion was crushed. 5 Commando later disbanded in 1967. But Hoare wasn't finished. In 1981, the aging mercenary resurfaced with a plot ripped from a pulp novel. Posing as a group of rugby-loving tourists, he led a team of commandos into the Seychelles in an attempted coup. They were caught at the airport when one of them accidentally revealed a hidden AK-47. The operation collapsed in a firefight. Hoare was jailed for a few years, then released to quietly fade from the mercenary world. He died in 2020, aged 100, a soldier of fortune until the end. His story, equal parts heroism, horror, and absurdity, became the blueprint for an era. Hollywood turned it into the wild geese, and 5 Commando became a symbol of what mercenaries could do.
Now, while I have your attention, I'd like to give a massive shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Raycon. As someone who never leaves home without earbuds, staying focused no matter where you are can be a real challenge. Whether you're trying to be productive on the go or navigating a busy environment, you're constantly faced with a choice. Tune in with your audio or tune out to stay aware of your surroundings. That's why I'm so excited to have this video sponsored by Raycon, because their essential open earbuds are the perfect solution for a life in motion. The design of Raycon essential open earbuds allow them to sit comfortably outside your ear canal, meaning they deliver a rich, crystal clear sound while leaving your ears completely open to your environment. This has been a lifesaver for me in so many situations. In an airport, for example, I can finally relax and listen to a podcast at the gate with total peace of mind, knowing I won't miss a single boarding call or gate change announcement. And this isn't just for big travel days, it's for my everyday routine too. When I'm working at a coffee shop, I can stay in the zone with my music while still hearing the barista call out my order. For a life on the go, comfort is everything. These are so lightweight, I can wear them all day and forget they're even there. Plus, the multi-angular hook gives them a secure fit that never slips. The tech is perfectly suited for this lifestyle. Multi-point connection lets me stay synced to my laptop and phone at the same time, seamlessly switching between them. The battery life is also incredible, with up to 8 hours on the earbuds and up to 36 hours of use with the case. What's truly amazing is that Raycon rivals the quality and sound of the other big audio brands for about half the price. It's no wonder over 3 million customers love their Raycons. They even come with a 30-day happiness guarantee, so returns are easy if you, for some reason, don't love them. Raycon sent me a pair for this video, and I've been using them for a while now, and they've become an essential part of my travel and work routine. You've got to try them out too. If you're ready to upgrade your on-the-go experience, I have a great deal for you. Click the link in the description box, or go to buyraycon.com/frontopen to get 20% off your purchase. That's buyraycon.com/frontopen. Using my link is a great way to support the channel. Now, let's get back into the video.
Bob Denard. From the jungles of Katanga to the beaches of the Comoros, Bob Denard built a career out of coups. Born Gilbert Bourgeot, he was a devout Catholic, a petty criminal, a former French naval commando, and one of the most successful mercenary commanders of the 20th century. In the post-colonial vacuum of Cold War Africa, Denard found a business model. Hire out loyal, French-speaking soldiers to topple fragile governments. By the time his run ended, he had led operations in more than half a dozen countries, commanded private armies, and ruled the nation from behind a presidential sash. He got his starts in the Congo in the 1960s, fighting on behalf of Moïse Duchombe in the breakaway Katanga province. Like many French soldiers of the time, Denard came from the brutal counterinsurgencies in Indochina and Algeria. In Biafra, he allegedly backed the short-lived breakaway republic in Nigeria's civil war. He was linked to royalist guerrilla efforts in North Yemen. By the mid-1970s, he had formed his own informal battalion, a hardened circle of ex-legionnaires, paras, and colonial war veterans who referred to themselves with gallows humor as les affreux, the terrible ones. France's secret service, the SDECE, maintained murky ties to Denard's operations. The arrangement served two purposes: project French influence across the old empire and keep communism out of key African capitals. Nowhere did that strategy play out more dramatically than in the Comoros. Denard landed there in 1975 and led a swift, bloodless coup that ousted the president. In 1978, he returned to remove the new one, Ali Swaley, who was later killed under mysterious circumstances. Denard installed Ahmed Abdallah, declared himself head of the presidential guard, and effectively became the power behind the throne. For over a decade, Denard ruled the tiny island chain as a kingmaker. He built up a palace guard and lived in a fortified villa surrounded by loyal French and Belgian fighters. His soldiers received land, salaries, and immunity from prosecution. Locals lived under the shadow of a foreign-controlled security apparatus. His reach extended beyond the Indian Ocean, though. In 1977, Denard launched a failed invasion of Benin, another former French colony aimed at overthrowing its Marxist government. The mission fell apart within hours. It was sloppy, reckless, and marked the beginning of the end for Denard's golden age. In 1989, President Abdallah was assassinated, likely with Denard's knowledge. He fled, but not for long. In 1995, at the age of 66, Denard staged his fourth and final Comoros coup. This time, France had had enough. French special forces flew in overnight, arrested him without a shot, and ended his private empire for good. Denard was tried in France, but never seriously punished. He received suspended sentences, stayed out of prison, and lived out his final years in relative obscurity. He died in 2007, his trial still unresolved. His legacy was that of the post-colonial warlord in a blazer. He blurred the lines between mercenary, intelligence asset, and colonial holdover. For France, he had been useful for a while, but in the end, even the pirates of the Republic get marooned. Watchguard International. In 1965, Colonel David Stirling, the man who founded Britain's elite Special Air Service during World War II, launched something new, a private army in a suit and tie. It was called Watchguard International, and unlike the wild mercenary bands wreaking havoc across Africa, this one had a boardroom, a logo, and critically, London's quiet approval. Stirling saw Watchguard as a business, a respectable, well-connected outfit offering military solutions to foreign governments in need. Its consultants were British veterans, often from the SAS, with experience in counterinsurgency and irregular warfare. Together with Lieutenant Colonel John Woodhouse, another SAS legend, Stirling set up Watchguard's headquarters in London, but incorporated offshore in Jersey. That gave the company flexibility, legal cover, and plausible deniability for when the work got murky. Its core mission was to supply skilled military advisors, trainers, and operatives to governments under threat, especially regimes friendly to Britain and the West, and especially in places too unstable for official deployments. WatchGuard quickly found its battlegrounds, the Arabian Peninsula. In Oman, WatchGuard operatives trained the Sultan's forces during the Dhofar Rebellion, a drawn-out insurgency backed by Marxist rebels. In Yemen, their men quietly supported royalist factions in that country's bitter civil war, helping prop up monarchist forces while the UK tried to keep its hands clean. They also advised militaries in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere in the Gulf, tailoring their expertise to desert warfare, guerrilla suppression, and internal security. Some missions flirted with outright regime change. In 1970, WatchGuard reportedly planned an operation to overthrow Libya's new ruler, Muammar Gaddafi, just months after he seized power. The idea was to install the exiled King Idris in a British-backed counter-coup, but the UK government, wary of the diplomatic fallout, shut it down before it could launch. WatchGuard had the men, the means, and the experience to pull it off. What they lacked, often, was the political green light. By the mid-1970s, WatchGuard's influence waned. Sterling stepped back in 1972. Newer players with looser scruples and deeper ties to private capital began to fill the space, but the blueprint had been written. WatchGuard International wasn't the first group of ex-soldiers to sell their skills, but it was the first to do so like a corporation, professionalized, semi-official, and scalable. It marked the beginning of the private military company as we know it. Keeny Meeny Services. In the 1970s, as the British Empire receded and official boots came off the ground, a new force stepped in to fill the vacuum, unofficially. It was called Keeny Meeny Services, and the name said it all. Low profile, deniable, hard trace. A phrase borrowed from Swahili, it became the code name for one of Britain's most secretive mercenary networks of the Cold War. Founded in 1975 by ex-SAS officers, KMS sought contracts and clients. With formal colonial withdrawal underway, the UK still needed ways to influence proxy wars and insurgencies without Parliament, press, or the public knowing. KMS offered the perfect solution: highly trained operatives officially off the books. Its operators were elite, almost exclusively former British Special Forces. Their job was to train local allies, plan operations, and, when necessary, pull triggers in places the British Army couldn't officially go. One of KMS's biggest footprints landed in Sri Lanka during the early stages of that country's civil war. In the 1980s, the government in Colombo hired KMS to help stand up a new paramilitary unit, the Special Task Force, designed to crush Tamil Tiger insurgents. KMS trainers flew helicopters, conducted raids, and directed counterinsurgency operations deep into rebel territory. Years later, reports and declassified documents linked KMS personnel to extrajudicial killings and atrocities, claims still under investigation by British authorities today. At the same time, Afghanistan burned. With the Soviet Union entrenched in Kabul and Mujahideen resistance fighters scattered in the hills, Western intelligence scrambled to respond. From 1983 onwards, KMS agents, under tacit British government mandate, began training Afghan guerrillas. The work was hands-on: sabotage, ambushes, survival in Soviet kill zones. KMS also surfaced in Central America. Though details remain murky, evidence suggests they aided US-backed Contra rebels in Nicaragua, adding another layer to Washington's proxy war against leftist regimes. As in other theaters, KMS offered a potent mix of military instruction and covert guidance, combat-ready help with none of the diplomatic liability. By the late 1980s, however, the secrecy began to unravel. Journalists and investigators started tracing KMS's trail through official files and warzone whispers. The firm dissolved quietly, and its veterans filtered into newer private military companies or returned to the fold of official state service. KMS left behind a precedent. It showed how a government could outsource war to trusted veterans and shape conflicts around the world without ever admitting it was involved. Executive outcomes. In the early 1990s, African capitals were falling. Rebel armies surged through war-torn states, peacekeeping missions faltered, and Western governments pulled back. Into that chaos stepped a South African company with a name like a business consultancy and the firepower of a battalion. Executive Outcomes, founded in 1989, didn't pretend to be neutral. It was there to win wars. The man behind it was Eben Barlow, a former lieutenant colonel in South Africa's apartheid-era special forces and one-time operative in the country's shadowy Civil Cooperation Bureau. As the old regime collapsed, Barlow spotted a vacuum and an opportunity. He recruited elite veterans who suddenly had no army to fight for. Many were from South Africa's 32 Battalion, men trained for bush war and counterinsurgency. Seasoned, dangerous, and unemployed, EO offered them a paycheck and a mission. From its headquarters in Pretoria and later London, Executive Outcomes sold total warfare solutions. They enabled governments to buy a ready-made army: trainers, mechanics, pilots, special forces, armored vehicles, helicopters. In Angola, the government was losing. The civil war had reignited after failed elections, and UNITA rebels were on the offensive. In 1993, Angola's MPLA leadership signed a $40 million contract with EO. Within months, 500 EO operatives, backed by thousands of local auxiliaries, launched a brutal counteroffensive. They crushed UNITA strongholds, retook key towns, and recaptured vital oil fields. By 1994, the rebels were forced back to the table. The war paused, temporarily. In Sierra Leone, the collapse was worse. RUF rebels were at the gates of Freetown. The army had disintegrated. In 1995, the government turned to Executive Outcomes. For $1.8 million per month, funded in part through IMF cash flows, EO hit the ground running. Helicopter gunships strafed rebel convoys. Ex-32 Battalion commandos led ground assaults. In just 10 days, they pushed the RUF more than 60 miles from the capital. Rebel HQ at Zagoda was wiped off the map. The diamond mines were retaken. The Abidjan Peace Accord followed soon after. This was PMC warfare at its peak: contracts, logistics, and results. EO took smaller jobs too, guarding oil facilities in Angola, training presidential guards in Uganda, even allegedly deterring coups by simply showing up in uniform. But it was their ability to decisively win battles that made Executive Outcomes infamous, and to some, indispensable. The model was simple: pay them and they'd end your war. For African governments facing collapse, that was worth more than diplomacy. But power came with pressure. By the late 90s, EO had attracted too much attention. UN officials denounced them, African leaders got nervous, and the new post-apartheid government in South Africa, eager to clean house, passed legislation to ban mercenary work outright. On January 1st, 1999, EO shut down. Officially. Unofficially, the network lived on. Veterans of EO filtered into other PMCs. Some joined Sandline, others went corporate. Eben Barlow returned years later with STTEP fighting Boko Haram in Nigeria in 2015. And in 2020, reports emerged that EO had reformed, smaller and quieter but still active, like a ghost from a war that never really ended. Executive Outcomes remains the gold standard for privatized war, efficient, tactical, and controversial. It proved a private company could succeed where armies failed and changed the nature of warfare in the process. Sandline International. By the mid-1990s, the lines between military contractor and mercenary had blurred. Then came Sandline International and shattered whatever lines were left. But that image didn't last. Founded in London in the early 1990s by former British Army officer Lieutenant Colonel Tim Spicer, Sandline was never subtle. It advertised openly, operated from a Chelsea office, and pitched itself as a new kind of private military company: professional, lawful, and diplomatic. Not bush war rogues, but peacekeepers in khaki. Behind the branding stood a network of ex-Special Forces personnel with deep ties to executive outcomes and a business model built on exporting military power to fragile states. Sandline offered the whole war package: weapons, strategy, and boots on the ground. And like EO before it, Sandline's footprint spread fast across collapsing post-colonial frontiers. The firm's most infamous debacle came in Papua New Guinea in 1997. The PNG government, desperate to regain control of Bougainville Island, had turned to Sandline to suppress a secessionist rebellion fueled by disputes over a lucrative copper mine. Sandline, subcontracting EO veterans, deployed 44 mercenaries, helicopter pilots, combat specialists, and logistics teams. Then the deal went public. PNG's army revolted. Soldiers mutinied, arrested the mercenaries, and placed the Prime Minister, Julius Chen, under house arrest. The scandal collapsed the government. The Sandline affair became a case study in what happens when a private army stumbles into sovereign politics. Barely a year later though, Sandline was at it again, this time in Sierra Leone. In 1998, exiled President Ahmad Tejan Kaba hired Sandline to reclaim power from the military junta that had aligned with RUF rebels. Sandline airlifted weapons into the country, trained loyalist militias, and coordinated strategy, violating a UN arms embargo in the process. The scandal reached London. Known as the Arms to Africa Affair, it triggered a parliamentary inquiry and forced the British Foreign Office to admit it had tacitly greenlit the operation. The fallout tarnished Sandline's reputation and forced the UK to confront how its veterans were being used in post-colonial proxy wars. Sandline's final operation came in Liberia in 2003. As Charles Taylor's regime teetered, Sandline reportedly assisted a rebel push near the war's end, adding one more grey zone campaign to its growing list. Everywhere it went, Sandline brought firepower, instability, and headlines. It operated under the language of security assistance, but in practice functioned as a freelance expeditionary force, armed, equipped, and barely accountable. By 2004, the firm was done. Spicer shut it down, citing a lack of government support and regulatory pressure. The message was clear. In the new international order, there was no more room for open mercenary work, no matter how polished the presentation. Sandline's rise and collapse pushed PMCs into the spotlight. It forced governments to re-examine the legal vacuum that allowed private armies to operate at the margins of diplomacy. And it helped lay the groundwork for tighter regulations on contractors who had once worked with a handshake and a shipping container of Kalashnikovs. DynCorp International. By the 2000s, few names were more deeply embedded in US overseas operations than DynCorp International. It didn't look like a private army, it looked like a corporation, but behind the logos and lanyards was one of the most operationally entangled military contractors of the post-Cold War era. DynCorp's origins dated back to 1946, born from a small aviation services company helping the US Air Force maintain aircraft. Over the next half-century, it evolved through mergers, rebrandings, and diversification, reaching far beyond mechanics and into military contracting on a global scale. By the early 1990s, DynCorp had already positioned itself as a key civilian contractor for peacekeeping and reconstruction missions. It provided civilian police trainers for UN operations in the Balkans, aviation logistics in combat zones, and base management services for the US military. As peacekeeping blurred into counterinsurgency, DynCorp adapted, and quickly. Its expansion only accelerated after 9/11. During the War on Terror, DynCorp became a staple of US foreign intervention. In Afghanistan, it trained the fledgling Afghan National Police, helped rebuild the Afghan Air Force, and maintained aircraft and logistics for NATO and US forces. In Iraq, it secured billion-dollar contracts to train the Iraqi police, provide personal security to US diplomats, and manage military base operations from Baghdad to Basra. At its peak, DynCorp had over 14,000 personnel deployed, and contracts spanning more than 30 countries. It wasn't only about training and logistics. DynCorp operated where policy needed muscle. Its teams protected Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan, Jean-Bertrand Aristide in Haiti, and officials in hot zones around the world. They ran escort missions, staffed security convoys, and occasionally found themselves in firefights, operating just shy of frontline combat. The company was also deeply involved in Plan Colombia, the US-funded anti-narcotics campaign in Latin America. DynCorp contractors flew crop-dusting missions over coca fields, trained Colombian security forces, and supported counter-cartel efforts across the Andes. But these operations weren't without controversy. Allegations emerged about chemical exposure, civilian harm, and blurred rules of engagement. One of DynCorp's darkest chapters unfolded in the Balkans. In 1999, while supporting UN missions in Bosnia, DynCorp employees were implicated in a sex trafficking scandal involving underage girls and forced prostitution. Whistleblowers from within the company exposed the abuses, prompting investigations, lawsuits, and the eventual reforms in contractor oversights. The incidents scarred the company's reputation, but didn't slow its growth. Throughout its history, DynCorp operated in zones where military presence required civilian cover. Somalia, Sudan, Kosovo, Colombia, Iraq, Afghanistan. It built a model that paired technical know-how with the logistical muscle of a private enterprise, effectively replacing functions once handled by national militaries or the State Department. In 2021, DynCorp was acquired by Amentum, a larger defense services firm. The brand disappeared, but the work continued under a new corporate umbrella. DynCorp's legacy is mixed. It built police forces and managed war zone logistics. It was accused of serious abuses and paid millions in settlements. But above all, it represented the full spectrum model of the modern private military contractor. Not just fighters, but mechanics, trainers, translators, and security teams, following the US government into every theater it entered. Blackwater. In 1997, deep in the swamps of North Carolina, a former Navy SEAL built a training facility for elite forces. It was remote, heavily secured, and privately owned. The company was called Blackwater, named after the dark marshes that surrounded it. Its founder, Eric Prince, came from money and a background in special operations. He envisioned Blackwater as a place where soldiers could train without bureaucracy, a free market alternative to government-run facilities. For a few years, that's all it was, until 9/11 changed everything. In the wake of the attacks, the US government scrambled to project force, build out logistics, and protect civilian personnel in hostile environments. In 2003, Blackwater landed a $21 million State Department contract to provide personal security for US envoy Paul Bremer in Iraq. That was the beginning. Over the next 5 years, Blackwater exploded into a private army with thousands of employees across Iraq, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. Its operatives, drawn from US Special Forces, foreign militaries, and private sector security, escorted convoys, guarded embassies, and secured CIA outposts. The company even fielded its own aviation wing, complete with armed helicopters and surveillance craft. At the height of the Iraq War, Blackwater was everywhere. Alongside DynCorp and Triple Canopy, it became one of the big three in the American contractor landscape, with contracts topping $500 million. Its teams moved through Baghdad in armored SUVs, heavily armed, operating under looser rules of engagement than conventional forces. Then came Nisour Square. On September 16, 2007, a Blackwater convoy escorting US diplomats opened fire in a crowded Baghdad intersection, killing 14 unarmed Iraqi civilians, including women and children. The massacre triggered international outrage. The Iraqi government tried to expel the company. US Congress launched investigations. 4 Blackwater contractors were eventually convicted of manslaughter, though all were later pardoned in 2020. By then, the Blackwater brand was toxic. Under mounting pressure, the company changed its name to Z Services in 2009. Prince stepped down from leadership, and by 2010 he sold the firm. New ownership rebranded it again in 2011, this time as Academy, and later folded it into the Constellis Group alongside other PMCs. The mission continued, but the spotlight dimmed. Outside Iraq and Afghanistan, Blackwater had extended its reach into other zones. It protected President Aristide in Haiti, flew logistics missions across Africa, and provided law enforcement support in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. It even pitched itself as a potential solution for crises like Darfur, advertising its ability to deploy rapidly with full spectrum capability. Inside war zones, Blackwater often operated in conditions more dangerous than the military itself. Its personnel were paid more, carried better equipment, and fought under looser oversight. For a time, the company became a symbol of everything critics feared about privatized warfare. The blurred chain of command, the lack of accountability, and the raw profit motive behind security contracting. After its rebranding as Academy, the firm focused on rebuilding credibility. Today, under Constellis, it still provides training, armed protection, canine units, and maritime security, but with far less visibility. It runs courses at the US Training Center in Moyoc, once the heart of the Blackwater Empire, now repackaged under a corporate banner. As for Eric Prince, he moved on to new ventures, from building a mercenary battalion in the UAE to launching Frontier Services Group in Hong Kong, a logistics firm serving Chinese infrastructure projects in Africa and Central Asia. Blackwater's legacy is unerasable. It shaped the debate around contractors in modern war. It forced the US government to rethink oversight, and it became a reference point, infamous, cautionary, and inescapable for how military power can be sold by the hour. Aegis Defense Services. In the wake of the Iraq invasion, as US and coalition forces scrambled to secure a country spiraling into insurgency, a new British player entered the fray. Aegis Defense Services, founded in 2002 by ex-Army officer Tim Spicer, stepped into the market with experience, connections, and timing. Spicer was no stranger to controversy. As the former head of Sandline International, he'd already navigated coups, embargoes, and international scandal in Papua New Guinea and Sierra Leone. With Sandline defunct, he regrouped. Aegis was the reboot, more polished, better structured, and aimed directly at the booming demand for post-9/11 security contracting. In 2004, Aegis secured what would become its defining contract, a $293 million deal with the US Department of Defense to serve as the primary coordinator of private security contractors in Iraq. This made Aegis more than a gun for hire. It became a meta contractor, responsible for overseeing the actions of dozens of smaller PMCs tasked with guiding convoys, infrastructure projects, and American personnel. Headquartered in London, with operations spread across Baghdad's Green Zone, Afghanistan, and beyond, Aegis built a workforce drawn from across the Commonwealth. British ex-SAS paratroopers, Gurkhas, and subcontracted units from Fiji, South Africa, and Sierra Leone. The company's expansion reflected the UK's version of post-imperial outsourcing, disciplined, multinational, and globally mobile. But its rise was shadowed by controversy. In 2005, a video surfaced online. Shot from inside a moving vehicle, it showed armed contractors, allegedly from Aegis, firing indiscriminately at Iraqi civilian cars. No official rules of engagement were violated, according to the US government. No charges were filed, but the footage became symbolic, proof for many of the unaccountable power private contractors wielded in war zones. Later reports revealed that Aegis had hired guards from Sierra Leone, including individuals who may have been former child soldiers, as a cost-cutting measure for deployments in Iraq. The optics of former African combatants patrolling Baghdad streets under British command stirred criticism. The company defended the hires as legal and vetted, but the story reinforced fears about the murky global labor practices sustaining the PMC economy. Despite the scandals, Aegis delivered. Its contract in Iraq was renewed multiple times. It expanded into Afghanistan, where it guided US Army Corps of Engineers projects and supported mentoring programs for Afghan security forces. It also took on quieter work in places like Libya, Sudan, and Saudi Arabia, security sector reform, government consulting, and VIP protection. Unlike Blackwater, Aegis kept a lower profile. It didn't try to dominate the media narrative. Its strength came from structure, and by 2010, Aegis had numerous contractors operating across conflict zones, making it Britain's most successful PMC of the Iraq War era. But in 2015, Aegis ceased to exist as an independent firm. It was acquired by Garda World, a Canadian security giant. The brand was folded into a larger corporate structure, and Tim Spicer exited the business. The buyout marked yet another chapter in the consolidation of the industry, where standalone PMCs gave way to multinational conglomerates backed by private equity and built for longevity. Aegis's legacy sits somewhere between a success story and cautionary tale. It proved that a UK-based firm could compete with Americans, win top-tier contracts, and scale up rapidly. But its ethical missteps, hiring practices, rules of engagement, contract behavior, underscored just how unregulated the private military world remained. In many ways, Aegis's arc mirrors that of the entire industry. A company that rose with the chaos of Iraq, thrived in the vacuum of oversight, and was eventually absorbed into the corporatized world of 21st century warfare by contract. Wagner Group. In modern warfare, few names have become as feared, politically explosive, or internationally disruptive as the Wagner Group. Emerging from the chaos of post-Maidan Ukraine, Wagner was a state proxy in disguise. Built to give the Kremlin deniability while expanding Russian influence abroad, Wagner blurred every line between public and private, soldier and war criminal, foreign policy and organized crime. Its origins trace back to 2014, the year Russia seized Crimea. As pro-Russian separatists fought in Donbass, a group of unmarked men in Russian gear joined the conflict. They weren't regular troops, they didn't wear insignia, but they were trained, equipped, and lethal. This was Wagner's debut. Officially, Wagner didn't exist. Russian law banned mercenary activity, and yet the group trained at Russian military bases, flew on military aircraft, and used Russian state weapons. The fiction was intentional. Wagner gave Moscow a plausible deniability tool, a way to wage war without ever acknowledging it. The group's name came from the call sign of Dmitry Utkin, a retired GRU Spetsnaz officer and reported neo-Nazi sympathizer. But the man pulling the strings and bankrolling operations was Yevgeny Prigozhin, a former convict turned caterer turned oligarch with close ties to President Vladimir Putin. Prigozhin gave Wagner the cash, the contracts, and the Kremlin's blessing. What began as a few hundred men in eastern Ukraine became a sprawling military enterprise. By 2015, Wagner was on the ground in Syria, backing Bashar al-Assad. It fought rebel groups, guarded oil fields, and took losses in direct combat with US forces, notably in 2018, when Wagner units tried to seize a gas plant in Deir ez-Zor and were annihilated by US airstrikes. Moscow disavowed knowledge. The dead were buried quietly. But it was Africa that truly revealed Wagner's scale. In Libya, the group backed General Khalifa Haftar, providing snipers, artillery, and drone support. In Sudan, Wagner operatives helped secure gold mines in exchange for protection contracts with the ruling regime. In the Central African Republic, they embedded with the Presidential Guard, trained local forces, and fought rebels while locking down diamond concessions for Russian companies. The same playbook emerged in Mali, Mozambique, and even Madagascar. Wagner would offer security, training, and election support in exchange for resources and political access. And unlike Western PMCs, Wagner didn't try to maintain a veneer of neutrality. It operated as an instrument of Russian power. In each of these conflicts, Wagner left behind the same trail: executions, torture, disinformation, and resource plundering. In the Central African Republic, videos surfaced of Wagner personnel mutilating prisoners. In Ukraine, they deployed ex-convicts as cannon fodder. In Africa, they ran online influence campaigns to sway elections and spread anti-Western propaganda. By 2022, Wagner had evolved into something larger than a mercenary outfit. It functioned more like a private expeditionary army, complete with tanks, artillery, air defense systems, logistics chains, and even its own media wing. Estimates put Wagner's strength in the tens of thousands, many recruited from Russian prisons, lured with promises of amnesty. That year, during Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Wagner forces took on a more public role. In the Battle of Bakhmut, they led one of the bloodiest campaigns of the war, using waves of prisoners to storm Ukrainian defenses in a relentless attritional assault. The cost of lives was staggering. Tens of thousands of Wagner fighters were killed or wounded, but the city eventually fell. Prigozhin became a nationalist icon, criticizing Russia's top generals and mocking the Ministry of Defense. Wagner was beginning to challenge the Russian state itself, and that challenge exploded in June 2023. In June 2023, the private army that had done the Kremlin's dirty work turned its guns on Moscow. Yevgeny Prigozhin, long the public face of Wagner, launched an open rebellion. He accused Russia's top generals of incompetence, corruption, and sabotage. Then, in a stunning turn, Wagner troops captured the southern Russian city of Rostov-on-Don, a key military command hub, and began a northbound convoy toward the capital. For 36 hours, Russia's most effective private force appeared to be an open mutiny. The crisis ended with a deal. Prigozhin agreed to halt the advance. Wagner fighters would be granted immunity. Prigozhin would go into exile in Belarus, and the Kremlin would pretend the whole thing hadn't happened. But the damage was done. The rebellion shattered the myth of Wagner as a loyal extension of the Russian state. It exposed deep rifts between the Russian military command and its most successful field commanders. And it humiliated the Kremlin, showing that a private force could seize Russian territory without resistance. 2 months later, on August 23, 2023, a private jet carrying Prigozhin exploded mid-flight. There were no survivors. The message was clear. Wagner's autonomy was over. Following his death, Putin and the Russian Ministry of Defense moved fast. Wagner's operations inside Russia were dismantled. Training bases like Molkino were absorbed by the military. Fighters were given a choice: join the regular army, transfer to affiliated units like Redut, or take contracts under the command of the Russian state. In Ukraine, Wagner's frontline presence dissolved. Many of its remaining fighters were folded into Rosgvardia, or reassigned to units under official military control. The days of Wagner acting as an independent strike force, mocking generals, and operating outside the chain of command were over. But in Africa, the story didn't end. Wagner's foreign deployments, particularly in the Central African Republic and Mali, continued. The branding remained, but the command structure had changed. What was once a private army became a state-controlled paramilitary network under a new name and a new management, still pursuing the same objectives: resource extraction, regime support, and geopolitical leverage. In the Central African Republic, Wagner contractors still protect the presidency, train local forces, and guard diamond mines. In Mali, they continue fighting jihadist groups in place of departing Western forces. Russia now manages these operations more directly, using Wagner's infrastructure and contacts while minimizing public exposure. By 2024, Russian officials stopped using the Wagner name in official statements, but the machine Prigozhin built lived on, rebranded, centralized, and repurposed as a tool of a Russian statecraft. Sadat International. In 2012, as civil wars erupted across the Middle East and Turkey began reasserting itself as a regional power, a new kind of private military firm appeared in Istanbul. Its name was Sadat International Defense Consultancy, and it wasn't interested in neutrality. Founded by a retired Turkish brigadier, General Adnan Tanriverdi, Sadat didn't hide its ambitions. Its stated mission was to build defense cooperation among Muslim-majority countries, train their armies, and help them become self-sufficient in warfare. But what that looked like on the ground was something else: proxy warfare, ideological training, and military exports in support of Turkish foreign policy. Tanriverdi was no backroom operator. He served as a senior military advisor to President Erdogan, and Sadat's ties to Turkey's National Intelligence Organization, or the MIT, were well known. His son, Melih Tanriverdi, would later take over as CEO. What emerged under their leadership was a paramilitary extension of the Turkish state, operating under the cover of privatization. Syria was its first battlefield. As war broke out across the border, Sadat helped organize, train, and transport Islamist-aligned militias into Idlib and Aleppo. Some of the fighters had links to jihadist networks, and many had Turkish backing. According to reports from analysts and journalists, Sadat worked in coordination with MIT to funnel weapons and manpower into northern Syria, using proxies to do what the Turkish military couldn't do officially. By 2013, the group had expanded into Libya, supporting the UN-backed government in Tripoli. There, Sadat provided logistics, weapons, and mercenaries, often drawn from Syrian militias it had trained. The fighters played a frontline role in the civil war, battling forces loyal to General Haftar and helping Turkey project influence across North Africa. US and UN officials accused Sadat of violating arms embargoes. Ankara denied everything. In 2020, when war broke out between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh, Sadat's role emerged again. It allegedly helped move Syrian mercenaries into the region to support Azerbaijani forces. Once more, Turkey's official involvement was limited, but its private military infrastructure was deeply engaged. Then came the Sahel. By 2023, Sadat contractors, many of them Syrian ex-fighters, were appearing in Niger, Mali, and possibly Burkina Faso. There, they operated in the same grey zones as Russian mercenary groups, occasionally clashing for influence. In some regions, they assisted in fighting jihadist insurgents, and in others, they filled the vacuum left by retreating Western forces. Like Wagner, Sadat was trading security for access, leveraging instability to build relationships with military juntas and resource-rich states. In 2025, Turkey went a step further. Reports emerged of Sadat preparing to deploy up to 3,000 contractors to Somalia, where they would support the federal government against al-Shabaab insurgents. The deal included protection for Turkish military facilities, training for Somali forces, and long-term basing rights in Mogadishu. Officially, it was part of a bilateral defense agreement. Unofficially, it marked Sadat's transformation into a full-spectrum military export platform. Through all of this, Sadat insisted it was a consultancy, not a mercenary group. It framed its work as Muslim Defense Cooperation and said it only worked with legitimate governments. But its choice of clients, its ideological positioning, and its involvement in multiple proxy wars told a different story. By 2024, Sadat had become a case study in the new generation of state-aligned PMCs, firms that don't just work for their governments, but help reshape the world in their image. Like Wagner, it blurred the line between contractor and combatant. But while Wagner traded brutality for resource control, Sadat's model was built on ideology, loyalty, and geopolitical positioning. Wherever Turkey moves, Sadat follows. And in a world where great powers increasingly rely on unofficial means to assert themselves, that makes Sadat a tool of statecraft, not a rogue operator. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed our breakdown of mercenaries in the modern historical context. Be sure to let us know in the comment section below which mercenary group you find the most interesting and why. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.